here to help you. I'm here to see what you're doing. And that technology barrier does not allow for actually good instructional practices.
The majority of American public students are now well into a virtual school year, and data from around the country is starting to show that middle and high school students are falling behind.
Some states are reporting disproportionately large numbers of African American deaths.
School closures in over 180 countries around the world nationwide.
Millions of parents across the country are struggling as they try to homeschool their children.
The governor's order to close schools takes effect for everyone.
School closures, very unlikely schools would resume this school year.
One of the biggest challenges that students face are not having internet service. Students are struggling with keeping cameras on, and some just can't adapt to that virtual learning. A lot of the students, they work better in a in-class environment, and they kind of have that camaraderie with all the other students and also with their teachers that make them feel comfortable on that level in the classroom.
Remote learning has had a negative effect on my students. More of my younger students than my older students, more in the ranges of first grade to about fourth grade, I'm gonna say. They have a really hard time concentrating and understanding the material throughout the duration of the class periods, throughout the duration of the day.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for sharing that. Mail or I put up the rubric, if we're looking at, one of your assignments.
So let's see. Rewatch that part of the video. I wanted to make sure everybody was clear on what we.
Good evening. Welcome back to another edition of Q's on the Move, the Smoke and Chat edition. My name is Brother Craig Wolford. This is Brother Brandon Miller from the Upsilon chapter. And today we're going to discuss COVID in the modern day education system. Who would have believed 2 years ago that we would have been in a situation where social distancing, masks, kids learning from hybrid, somebody coughing in your presence would cause so much angst in the world and society today. Well, today we're going to discuss how that is affecting our biggest asset, which is our kids. I have a lot of brothers with us today, and most of them are educators or in the education field. So let's get right into the questions here today. Brothers, what are some of the challenges that are affecting working in this COVID environment? Brother Hill.
Well, one of the major factors impacting education today in this environment was access to technology. That was one of the first hurdles that many schools and educators had to really address, because prior to the pandemic, there was no need to make sure that every student had proper access to equipment and reliable Wi-Fi.
You had to have Wi-Fi just to go to school. What did you do to try to address that situation? Because we're in Wilmington. Wilmington is not necessarily like a big city, but they don't have. There's not a lot of people that have it. If you have it, you don't. So if you have it, you don't. We're in Wilmington, Delaware, by the way, for people who don't know. So what did y'all do to address this situation?
So the first thing was to actually get the devices. If you were fortunate enough to be in a district that had them, then making sure they were distributed. Because if you remember, we left fairly quick. We went to school on a Wednesday or Thursday. By Friday, we were home. So it wasn't a lot of turnaround time to prepare for that. So the first step was to organize distribution to make sure kids had devices. Second hurdle after you had devices was making sure they had reliable internet, which was a tougher task. But when you talk about those districts that did not have the devices, some districts had to use funds that they had earmarked for other programs that they were no longer going to have to spend money on because we were going to be hybrid or remote. They could then use that money to buy emergency devices. Then a few months later, government kicked in funds that allowed some districts that didn't have devices to purchase more to make sure that every student had devices.
So it's interesting, Brother Hill. Thank you. Anybody's got any further input on that matter?
Because they are using Zoom for the most part, it's hard for the teacher to provide assistance, direct assistance. It's hard for teachers to encourage kids to participate. It's hard for teachers to really establish proximity to the student, which says to the student, I'm here to help you. I'm here to see what you're doing. And that technology barrier does not allow for actually good instructional practices. So you have those kinds of challenges that teachers have had to deal with.
You have students coming in person, and then you have kids who learn remotely. So that's difficult for teachers too, to try to blend both parts together. However, our teachers have been very creative in terms of making sure that the students get their instruction. They're talking a little bit more now than they did before with the parents, because now the parents are having to get involved with the instruction. They have to help the students to get on the computer and make sure that the students are being engaged for the full length of the instruction. And I think one of the pluses now is that the parents are learning along with the student. So therefore, some of our students say that they like the virtual part more than the in-person. But you know that most of our students love the interaction with the other classmates and the teachers, so therefore they prefer the in-person instruction. So therefore, it's an ebb and flow between the teacher and the student and the parent. So therefore, what we're seeing now is a new way of teaching in addition to a new way of learning for our students.
What happens when those parents that you talked about have to go back to work? Like, I know when this first happened as a parent of three girls, that and my lady has a 7-year-old. So when this first occurred, parents would give a time off to be out with their kids, but that time ended, and those parents had to go back to work. So what are you doing with those kids, those 7-year-olds that are still really kind of just sitting at home with with no one really there to be like, okay, you gotta go to the next thing, or this is an A, this is a B, or whatever you're doing. What are you doing in that situation?
It's a major adjustment for the parents, in particular those parents who have children who's underage and cannot stay at home by themselves. But we're unique in my particular situation. We deal strictly with high school, so therefore those students are able to stay at home with their by themselves to get their instruction. However, there are parents who have to stay home because they have younger children at home, so therefore in their house you got to have peace and quiet while the students are getting instruction. Other activities are going on in the house, so therefore they got to manage the house climate, as opposed to we say in school, the school climate in terms of interaction with other students and interaction with the teacher. Now they got to have the home climate and make sure that it's safe, that it's quiet, and it's conducive for that child to learn.
The concept of truancy. You'd be surprised at the number of children who come and check in on Zoom when they want to. Some have not even checked in all year. There are many, many high school youngsters who have gotten full-time jobs. The whole idea of truancy and not being connected to school, period, is one that needs to be addressed.
For various schools, one of the biggest problems, like Dr. Lampkin said, you have kids that are now that used to come to school. They're now working now. Some of them are forced to stay home and watch the younger kids and still try to complete the virtual aspect of education. It's just not working out at this point. So, you have organizations like communities and schools that's trying to implement programs and create things to try to curb those truancy issues, and also reach out to the kids and try to work out other situations. And something as simple as we don't have Wi-Fi at home to even get online. Those organizations and community partnerships try to help solve some of those issues that the school is dealing with at this time, to take certain problems off their plate, to help alleviate issues, to make sure mainly to get the kids not only finish school, but to graduate as well. You have a big gap with the 12th graders and the 9th graders. 9th graders that are just coming into high school is not having that high school experience that we normally had before. And you got 12th graders that get ready to graduate that may not graduate because they're not even logging onto the system.
One of the questions is, what are the major effects that remote learning is having on the mental and physical health of students during this virtual learning?
Virtual learning. I think of young people sitting at computers all day, checking in, checking out. The bottom line is, technology was always viewed as one strategy for instruction. Now it has become the end all and be all. So you have what they're calling now Zoom fatigue or virtual fatigue. Well, let's face it. While we want the main reason for young people to come to school to be learning, that is a misconception. If you've been in education, have read any of the educational research, a major piece to schooling is development, both physical, mental, and more important to young people, social development. And to sit at home, they don't get to see their friends. I suspect that many of them are having anxiety. Many of them are becoming disengaged. And many of them are unfortunately falling behind. So I think it's having, especially for the extrinsically motivated young people who are accustomed to the teachers giving that constant encouragement and push and support, etc. They're not getting that.
Hello, my name is Kenya Wilson. I currently teach at Harlan Elementary as a special education teacher. I teach grades K through 1, and some of the ways that remote learning has affected my students is they have a lot of issues with attention to task, and having to stay on a screen for long periods of time is difficult for them. Socially, they're not able to interact often with their peers. It's difficult with small children to be able to use or navigate a lot of the technology. We use Zoom. Zoom is great, but being able to put 5 and 6-year-olds on a Zoom to be able to interact with each other is not ideal.
Remote learning from a parent's perspective is that it has had a positive impact on my children because it allows them to get extra hours of sleep. The extra hours of sleep helps reduce stress, and it'll also allow my children to focus more on their schoolwork.
One thing that I've noticed during the transition to telelearning Zoom was I witnessed firsthand. My son Steve, as he's 10 years old, he needs special needs, and he has an IEP or individual education plan. The one thing that I have noticed is that the school district that he happens to be a part of, after putting him in school district, did a great job of transitioning his plan from in-person to online. And he's able to get the extra assistance he needs in the subject areas in which he struggles in.
Emotionally, I feel like they get really discouraged about being able to understand what's going on in class because they're not learning in an efficient environment for their age group.
From a parental perspective, our children maintain minimum impact as it relates to their educational experience due to the COVID-19 global pandemic across the world. their school's program, educational program, issued laptops again prior to COVID-19. And they also had instituted a global classroom, a virtual classroom, where the students were able to submit discussionals, submit their assignments, and also they had lectures already pushed through their system. This year, with the pandemic, they added to that, and they provided more variables learning variables as it relates to online and live training for our kids. So because of the minimum impact, my wife and I, we decided to keep our kids out of school until the fall, or herd immunity, whatever one comes first, because we believe the safety of our children is paramount, as well as the teachers and the instructors that are teaching us.
So we have a brother in our chapter, Brother Anthony Thornton, who is a healthcare administrator at Christiana Hospital, who's going to explain to us some of the effects that COVID has on the mental and physical health of the community. Brother Thornton.
I look at it from the perspective of the student athlete. Being a former athlete myself, my heart is near and dear to student athletes and the impact that sports can play in their life. Currently, I'm an official in the state of Delaware from a high school and youth perspective for football. And to say we had a challenge this year, we're trying to get the season off would be an understatement. There was a lot of guidelines and procedures in place that were put in by the state before we could actually have a season this year. We managed to get through it. Some struggles along the way. From high school level, we did have a delayed start to the season. We were able to get through it, just finished off the state championship game in December. During the course of the season, one of the things that I did personally was I talked to some of the players before, during, and or after the game about the impact and just getting perspective. And not surprisingly, a lot of them were very grateful that we were able to have a season. So from that perspective, I was happy to be able to help serve them. That being said, I was conflicted myself with having a season personally, with seeing nationally and also around the world how COVID had an impact on different people's lives. So I was conflicted, but nevertheless we got to the season. I was happy for them.
I think that's an interesting point, but I think we should get a teacher's point of view on that. Brother Mark Keith Rutherford, 2009 member of the Upsilon chapter. Let's go to him, Brother Rutherford.
Some of the difficulties that students are facing are getting up late. Some students, their Wi-Fi service isn't that well, so they have to use a hotspot. And, sometimes the hotspots are not that accurate. And then at the same time, just being in this distant learning situation, it's an advantage to some students because some students work better by themselves and they're not distracted by others in the classroom. But then there are those students that need to come to school where they need that outlet. They need somebody to just keep them in line with what they need to do when it comes to their school learning.
There are now state and federal laws for paid leave during this pandemic, but not everyone is eligible.
I think it becomes difficult for parents in general because, like I said, once that FMLA ended for most of the parents, if you have an underage kid, you kind of stuck. You know what I mean? You're like stuck with no recourse. Like if you can have like a lot of daycares want to take people in, you know what I'm saying? So you really do have your 14-year-old watching.
Well, that was the biggest problem on the high school level. The kids, the older kids are forced to watch the younger.
Yeah.
They got to stay home.
Yeah, but you can't just assume that this was just about education. This quickly became about politics and money.
Yeah.
With businesses being out as long as they were out, with the transition from one president to the other, this became a hot button topic. And it was a disregard for the well-being. Like health became a third factor in this. It was, let's open up these cities, let's open up these businesses. Parents got to go to work, these kids got to go to school.
And I don't know that was the right path to take.
Absolutely not.
Because if there had been some really serious planning about how to do the whole thing in terms of shutting stuff down. Okay, yeah, it may have hurt first, but then when you have these surges, you gotta shut it down, open it up.
What let me ask you, so like, okay, so wait, so you're talking about like shutting stuff down and stuff. Most parents, let's talk about Wilmington for example. Most parents, most people cannot go a month without an income. Most people can't go that long without income. So once the business said, well, okay, you don't have to come back to work. You're not gonna lose your job, but we can't keep on paying you during this downtime. Or you drop from doing X amount of money down to a quarter of your income. You're in the same situation. Now you get into a situation where you're fist fighting somebody in the parking lot for a loaf of bread because you can't afford anything. So those are the aspects. I mean, it's so interesting you'll say that because me and my 18-year-old got into it. She thinks exactly the same with you, and I agree with you. But financial wise, most people can't afford that. So even people need to get back to work. So,
but that's what I'm talking about. Where it became political, right? Other countries that were dealing with this is a global.
Yeah.
Other countries gave every citizen thousands of dollars. Multiple.
You said every citizen, right?
Every citizen. Anyone that wasn't able to work received thousands monthly, right? We didn't respond that way as a country. Now, that's where the politics come in. Where did you believe the government should or shouldn't step in to help float the economy, right? Because our focus started out health-wise and quickly shifted to money and politics.
Well, it had no choice but to do that because people were unemployed. They had no money. They had no food. They couldn't pay bills. They couldn't pay mortgage. They couldn't pay rent. You know, that's why there were so many other pieces to the whole CARES Act, where they, prohibited evictions and that kind of thing, because those were becoming the bigger issues. Food, just those basic needs that you talked about with Maslow.
Now you gotta be careful with that. Now, see, now even with the evictions, they like I work in delinquent accounts for the city, right? So the people believe like that money is going somewhere. Like there's people that because of the CARES Act, and they can't be evicted right this second, or they don't have to pay the electric bill, which is actually starting to change right now without having the electric shut off, and even for the city, the water shut off. They think they can keep running that bill up, and that bill is going somewhere.
It's not.
When it ends. As soon as that thing ends, they're gonna go, where's my money? They're gonna go, where's my money? There's not gonna be anything stopping you from cracking somebody in the head. So that I don't understand. They're not even. Some people aren't even trying to I'm gonna pay just my regular bill. I ain't talking about the old before you started. I'm talking about at least keep up with the bill that you have, so that you're not $10,000 in the hole or $1,000 in the hole. The outstanding discussion, and I want to thank again Psi Phi Fraternity, the panel, the students, and the parents that was involved. Many blessings and farewell. Any last words of advice? Hard to endure, sweet to recall. With that, we say good night.
Brother Brandon Miller, Bosses of the Upsilon Chapter.
Brother Craig Wolfrey, Vice Bosses of the Upsilon Chapter.
Gerald Allen, Director of School Operations and Human Resources for Newcastle County Vocational Technical School District.
Carlton Lampkins, retired Deputy Superintendent, current Interim Executive Director of Communities and Schools of Delaware.
Kyle Hill, currently serving as the proud principal of Howard High School of Technology in Wilmington, Delaware.
Greetings, Andre Thornton, new site coordinator for the Communities and School at Glasgow High School.